I was trying a case when I was on the bench in New Jersey, a small claims case. So you walk out into the courtroom, there are this many people in the courtroom, and they each want their case heard before lunchtime because at 1:30 in the afternoon, the same size crowd will return. The typical case is the dry cleaner ruined my dress, but he also tried to pick up my sister. So a lawyer says to me, "Your Honor, I need a translator to present this case to you." I said, "What's the language?" He said, "Italian." I called the courthouse administrator. The courthouse Italian translator was in another courtroom. So I said to the throngs, "Is there anybody here that can speak Italian?" Little guy in the back raises his hand. He comes up. We swear in the translator. We swear in the witness. Here's exactly what happens. Lawyer to translator, tell the court your name. Translator to witness, what is your name? I said, let me see where this is going to go. Ask the next question, counselor. All right, Your Honor. Lawyer to translator, give the court your address. Translator to witness, where is your house? I looked at this character. I said to him, "I thought you told me that you could speak Italian." He said, "I can, Your Honor, but my English, she's not so good." One time I was picking a jury in a criminal case in New Jersey where I sat on the bench. The judge picks the jury. So again, you walk out into a courtroom with a crowd this size, and from a crowd a little smaller than this, you have to extract 12 people who have no bias, no interest, no prejudice, no knowledge of the case, no concern with the outcome. This was a drug distribution case. I had a feeling that there were some people in this courtroom that didn't want to be on the jury. So I said, "Is there anybody here that can't serve on the jury?" Little lady raised her hand, and I said, "Yes, madam, what is it?" She said, "I can't be on this jury because of my occupation." I thought, well, all right, drug distribution case, what could this lady do? I said, "All right, madam, what do you do?" She said, "I'm a soothsayer." A soothsayer? This is 1995. Who calls themselves a soothsayer? I fell for it. I said, "All right, madam, how does this keep you from being on this case?" She said, "Judge, I already know how it ends up." I should have said, "Lady, tell us now and save us the next 3 weeks in the courtroom." All right, from ridiculous trials to sublime and serious and history-changing trials. Some men say the earth is round, and some men say it is flat. But if it is round, could an act of parliament make it flat? And if it is flat, could the king's command make it round? This was an argument made by Thomas More on his trial for high treason. The alleged act of treason was the refusal to acknowledge that the king was the head of the church on earth and could make any law he wanted. When Moore made this argument to his jury, he was not only appealing to their common sense. Of course the parliament couldn't make a flat earth round, and of course the king couldn't make a round earth flat. He was appealing to their understanding of what lawyers and philosophers, and I hope you after today, understand to be the natural law, the natural order of things. The order in the universe created by God cannot be changed by man. It's a pretty basic principle and a pretty basic concept. The argument would be made by Thomas Aquinas. It had been refined from Aristotle. It would be articulated by John Locke. It would be written down by Thomas Jefferson. When Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He was arguing that our rights come from our humanity, and that these rights are inalienable, meaning they cannot be taken away from us. And he was making that argument from the natural law, the same argument that Thomas More unsuccessfully made to his jury. Before Jefferson made that argument, we were, of course, colonists. And we were ruled over by a king and a parliament 3,000 miles away. It seems crazy today that an island would rule a continent with 3,000 miles between them at a time when it took 3 months to get across the ocean. But that's the law and the oppression under which we suffered for 200 years. The king and the parliament had ingenious ways of raising money from us. And one of those ways was called the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act required that every piece of paper in your possession, every book, every pamphlet, every legal document, every financial document, even a poster you were going to nail to a tree, had to bear the king's image. It had to have a stamp with the king's face on it. You think the post office is rough today? You had to go to a foreign post office in the United States and buy a stamp with the sitting king's image on it and put it on every piece of paper in your house. Question: how did the king know if his image was on every piece of paper in your house? Answer: the Parliament enacted the Townshend Acts. The Townshend Acts gave British soldiers the power to write their own search warrants. So they would show up at your home, knock on the door, hand you a piece of paper in which they had authorized themselves to enter your house, ostensibly to look for the stamps. Of course, while there, they might help themselves to food, to alcohol, to furniture. They would frequently even help themselves to the house, which is why we have the Third Amendment that prohibits quartering of troops against the wishes of the owner of the house. This was the last straw. The Stamp Act was so unpopular, even among some of the British ruling classes, that Parliament rescinded it. But the damage was already done. We fought a revolution. We won the revolution. We wrote a constitution. And when we wrote the Constitution, we assured ourselves that the things that the king and the parliament did to us when we were colonists, the government that we would popularly elect and choose ourselves, would never do to us when we are Americans. When we wrote the Constitution in the hot and sticky summer of 1787 in the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, by the Delaware River, there was a great debate. And the debate went back to what Thomas More had argued to his jury, and Thomas Jefferson had written in the Declaration of Independence, and Thomas Aquinas had written as the natural law, and that was, where does freedom come from? The small government people, James Madison argued, freedom comes from our humanity, and our humanity is a gift from God. And as God created us in his own image and likeness, and as he is perfectly free, therefore we are perfectly free. And our rights are as natural to us as the noses in the middle of our faces and the fingers on the ends of our hands. That was the argument Madison made, called the natural law. Unfortunately, there was a big government crowd at Philadelphia even in 1787. It was Alexander Hamilton and John Adams, and they argued that without the government there can be no freedom, and as the government protects your freedom, it is the government that gives you freedom. And in bad times, the government can take the freedom back, and in good times, the government can give the freedom to you and you can exercise it. Fortunately, because we have a Bill of Rights, we know that Madison and the small government people and those who believe in natural rights, as Jefferson had written in the Constitution, prevailed. And the Constitution was enacted only because the Bill of Rights was promised to be added, which it was 3 years later. And so, our right to think as we wish, to speak as we think, to say what we speak, our right to worship or not to worship, our right to associate or not to associate, our right to protect ourselves. If anybody tells you that the Second Amendment was written to protect hunters' rights, there's some liberal crackpot from New York or California. The Second Amendment was written to allow you to protect yourself when the police can't or won't. And it was written to allow you to use it against the government if it is taken over by tyrants. All of these rights were written down. It's impossible to write down all of the rights, so they wrote down the Ninth Amendment. And the Ninth Amendment said, just because we wrote down some rights in the preceding 8 amendments doesn't mean these are the only rights that we've written down. But we have created a limited government. It can't do everything. It can only do the specific 17 powers, specific 17 things we have said in the Constitution. One of my favorite amendments, if you have to pick one, is the 4th. Because the 4th Amendment stands for the greatest right there is after the right to life, and that is the right to be left alone. Today we call this the right to privacy. It guarantees that there are areas of human activity immune from intrusion by the government. And that immunity is as natural to us as our thoughts and our words and our expressions, and the government is obliged under the Constitution to respect that immunity itself and to protect us when someone else tries to interfere with it. Now, all of these things sounded wonderful in the Bill of Rights, and they sound nice as I articulate them to you today. Unfortunately, we have a sordid history of the violation of these rights. Think about it. In the second presidency, that's John Adams, the second president of the United States, the country enacted the Alien and Sedition Acts. The Alien and Sedition Acts were written out of fear of the French. Oh, how the times have changed. The French Revolution was going on in France. The government here was worried that something similar might happen. Jefferson had been the ambassador to Paris before we were the United States of America under the Constitution. He was the ambassador under the Articles of Confederation. So they wrote this bizarre law which said if you're French and you want to be an American citizen, you have to be here for 14 years. Oh, and by the way, if you are here, French, American, alien, foreign, natural born, whatever you are, if you criticize the government and bring it into disrepute, specifically the president, the cabinet, the Supreme Court, and members of Congress, you can be charged with violating the Alien and Sedition Acts and sent to jail for 2 years. How could the same generation, in some instances the very same human beings who wrote, "Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech," words that all of you can recite, the opening lines of the First Amendment. How could the same human beings who wrote that also write a law which says you can go to jail if you criticize us? By the way, did you note who was missing from that list of those that you can't criticize? The vice president. It was Jefferson. He didn't care what they said about him. You remember a little bit of history. In those days, people didn't run on tickets. Everybody ran for president. Whoever finished first became president. Whoever finished second became vice president. Can you imagine how bizarre this would be in today's times? Nevertheless, John Adams had a vice president who hated him, and Jefferson had a president he didn't want to talk to, but that was the law at the time. Congressman Matthew Lyons, a small government Jeffersonian anti-federalist from Vermont, said that President Adams was more interested in pomp and circumstance than he was in the powers of the presidency. Now, all right, Adams went along with that. And then Congressman Lyons went a little too far, and he made fun of the president's waistline. And he referred to the President of the United States as his rotundity. And for that, Congressman Lyons was indicted, tried, and convicted of violating the Alien and Sedition Acts because he brought the presidency into disrepute by mocking his waistline. Now, if you're from Boston or New Jersey,